Geeks and geekettes, gats and gittens, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome to another edition of Ask Chuck Dixon, where you ask me questions about what I do for a living. And what I do for a living is I write comic books. This episode was a little bit delayed because I'm having lagging issues with my video program. I think it's because I stack up too many images. I'm editing this live as I go. There's no post-production here at Ask Chuck Dixon. So I think my OBS program is objecting to the abuse I'm putting it through by putting far too many images. I think that's because I'm having these issues now because I'm trying to do longer episodes. That ain't working, so I might have to split this episode into two. So if you're enjoying this, there will be a sequel. Hey, a super thank you to Joseph Fazio, Chris W., and King Leek for hitting the super thanks button there at the bottom of your screen. It's right there. It's so easy to click on. And if you want to subscribe to me on a more permanent basis or on a more regular basis, you can go to subscribestar.com, look for Chuck Dixon, and sign up. There's free stuff, free goodies, either digital or physical, every single month going out to regular subscribers here. And I think you'll be happy. Some of the stuff, particularly the physical copies, are unique to this subscription service. Collectibles, my friends. William O'Neill, why do so many current creators seem to view the good guys as the bad guys? Well, I'm going to lay some truth on you. It goes back to the beginning of the importation of writers from the UK into the American comic scene. Writers from the UK writing superheroes was not a good mix for the most part. A lot of these guys couldn't write heroes, and this is because they came from, a lot of them came out of the generation of writers who worked on titles like 2000 AD, and characters like Judge Dredd. Now, I love me some Judge Dredd, and I like the cynicism. I like the fact that it's a parody. I like the fact that Judge Dredd is the villain in his own story. While we, laugh or cheer him on as he's wasting bad guys, we're always reminded that he is a fascist tool, and he often puts people in ISO cubes or murders them outright for even minor infractions that would be misdemeanors in a normal world. No one wants to live in Mega City 1. And while we think, me included, I think he's a cool character. I find him terribly amusing. Unfortunately, approaching a hero in that way, it just wasn't a good fit for American comics because the English writers and Scots writers and Irish writers, they went the deconstruction route. They tore the superheroes down, and it kind of begins with Watchmen, and then spreads, and it spreads beyond the UK writers, and American writers begin making their material more dark, their characters more flawed, and sort of ripping away at the foundations of these iconic heroic characters, these wish fulfillment characters, these warts and all portrayals. We're still living with it today. And I think it's harmed American comics overall. And I don't think it was the intention of any of the UK writers that they would have the last word on these franchises, but that's the way it turned out. Their work was highly influential, because a lot of it was very good. It was entertaining and thought-provoking and well-crafted. It's just the tone of it kind of infected American comics. And in the long term, a deleterious effect. I have nothing but respect for a lot of the UK writers, and I enjoy their work, but I just don't, as I said before, I just don't think it was a good fit for American superheroes in the long term. Jeff Winstead, Chuck, what are your thoughts on DC's handling of the Charlton action heroes, speaking of Watchmen? Particularly O'Neill's version of the question, which seemed to be an intentional thumb in the eye to Ditko. Ditko's, question was typical Ditko character, a guy who is transformed by his disguise into almost another personality. He's not as brutal as Mr. A, another Ditko creation, but he's, there's no gray areas in his mind, either as Vic Sage or as the Question. And then we get Denny's run. And Denny actually did a lot more Question than Ditko did, and he had quite a long run, primarily with Dennis Cowan on the art, and it's well regarded, as it should be. Now, Ditko was an objectivist, which is a philosophy. A lot of people think it's a political theology. It's really a philosophy. It's really a life philosophy, and it spills over into politics. An objectivist, his viewpoint of a black and white world spills over into everything he does. And Ditko, he walked the walk. He was a highly principled man who, and a lot of times, paid the price or sacrificed because of his viewpoints. On the other hand, Denny O'Neil was, and he would not mind me saying so, was a bleeding heart New York City, Manhattan liberal. And the two could not be further apart politically. But these two guys worked together. I mean, they knew each other. They worked together quite a number of times. And I think they had a high regard for each other. And I don't know Ditko, but I do know Denny, or did know Denny, and he never held anyone's politics against them. His main concern was, can you meet a deadline? So I don't think it was an intentional thumb in the eye. I'll tell you what it was, and why it was different than Ditko's interpretation is because Denny was a huge aficionado of the private eye genre. He loved John D. MacDonald novels, and things like that. And I think he saw the Question as a way to do private eye comics, because comics are comics. They're not, American comics are all about superheroes and masked vigilantes and things like that. So he was never going to be allowed to do a straight up private eye book. But this was the closest he could get. And so this was his homage to MacDonald and Chandler and people like that. And I really think that was the difference between his approach and Ditko's. I don't think there was an ounce of politics in it or an ounce of resentment in it. So there you go. Just the same character seen through two lenses. And you see that a lot in genre fiction when another creator takes over. A little bit of their personality is going to be a part of that. It's unintentional. Andy Openshaw, if you could work with any penciler for the rest of your career, who would it be, and why would it be Graham Nolan? Why wouldn't it be Graham Nolan? Graham and I have worked together for decades. Our careers in comics began at almost exactly the same time. I met Graham very early on in my early run on Airboy at Eclipse, and we worked together on Skywolf, and then consequently over the years worked together many, many times. We are working together now at a brand new company in which we are founders. We over the years we became friends. We have much the same approach to the material. We are constantly honing our craft. We've got a lot of regard for the same people that came before us. Just generally share the same attitude about life and comics and stuff like that. And why wouldn't I want it to be Graham? He's the whole package. He terrific storyteller, a great story guy, a good writer in his own right, a very good writer in his own right. And he brings it. He brings the action and suspense and all the rest of it. And he's also a cartoonist, and I mean that in a very complimentary way. Graham has a great range of styles that he takes advantage of. He can go from nearly photorealistic to, Bigfoot humor, and does both very, very well. So yeah, I mean, if I had to pick a guy, I mean, if in some weird scenario I was trapped on a desert island with a comic book penciler and a comic book publisher, Graham would be cool to hang out in weird comic book Gilligan's Island scenario. Of course, I've worked with lots of other talented people, too many to list, really. And there's any number of them that I would be happy writing for the rest of my life. But Graham certainly, he's at the top of the list. Russ Maharis, did you plan on a career writing comics, or did it just evolve that way? I can't remember when I didn't read comics. And no, this is not a picture of me. This picture was probably taken a few years before I was born. I never wanted to do anything else except for a brief period when I was 6. I toyed with the idea of being either a Catholic priest or a milkman. A Catholic priest because I thought they only worked on Sunday mornings, and a milkman because I overheard the milkman telling my mother at 10 in the morning that this was his last street and he was going home. And I thought, wow, this guy gets off work at 10 in the morning. I was an idiot. I had no idea he started at 2. I thought, wow, this guy only works a few hours and goes home. I mean, that's cool. So obviously I was looking for careers where I could spend a lot of time at home and not have to work very hard. So little did I know how much work I would have to do in comics, even though I love every minute of it, as you know. But, I was a young kid with a dream. I thought at first I was going to be a comic book artist, and I drew hundreds and hundreds of pages of comics on my own before I came to the bitter realization that I didn't have the discipline, the talent, or the dedication to really be a top drawer comic book artist, and who wants to be a mediocre comic book artist? So I concentrated more on the writing from that point on. But those years spent drawing all of those comic book pages weren't wasted, because it gave me a greater understanding of the medium, because I was trying to do it myself. And of course, a great appreciation for what comic book artists do, because I couldn't do it. I would never have made it in that career. But drawing all those pages, putting in all those hours, really gave me a greater understanding of how the medium works, and how best to use the real estate on a comic book page. And I think, that's been translated into the way I write the scripts. Because, in my mind, I'm drawing those pages in my mind as I'm writing them. They never turn out the way I pictured them, but that's okay. At least I'm aware of what the page will look like, and, how much it will bear as in terms of dialogue and things like that, and how to move the eye down the page. All the things that an artist has to consider, I'm considering first, to try to, not do some of their job for them, but anticipate their needs vis-a-vis what they need to see in the script to get the story and put it across. So there you go. But yeah, I've always wanted to. Can't even remember the first comic I read. Mark Randall, knowing what you know now about the current state of the comic industry, would you still want to write comics for the big dogs, Marvel and DC? Well, I gotta say, are they still the big dogs? They're getting a lot of competition from indies. Their sales are down. There's a lot of competition from independent producers. They're certainly still on top when it comes to ancillary medium, movies, TV, and all the rest of it. But comic-wise, they don't sell anywhere like they used to. Would I go back to work for them? Yes, but I would need guarantees. And the greatest guarantee is that I won't be taken off of a project in the middle. Because it's frustrating to get to work on a project and then just be removed from it. DC used to have what they called continuity contracts, and I used to sign them every year on all of my regular titles. And the continuity contract guaranteed that I would write 12 issues of that title. In exchange, at the end of the 12 issues, I would be paid for a 13th issue I didn't write. It was a bonus to try to get talent to stay on titles. And they don't really do that anymore. If you read comics now, or even if you just read the solicitations and previews, you see that these teams, creative teams, change all the time. I think these are editorial whims, or maybe the creative teams aren't meeting their deadlines, or for whatever reason, you don't get any. In very few instances do you see the same creative team on a book for more than 2 years, or even for a year. often even for 3 months. So I would need some guarantees that they would, keep me on the book as long as it was selling. I mean, I wouldn't insist that I be kept on a book that was failing and losing the company money. But as long as the book was profitable, or at least breaking even, they would keep me on the book, because it's hard to work up steam when you know you're going to be fired at any moment. And it's also hard to world build and create ensemble casts and create like long-term sagas when they might be interrupted at any moment. So I'm a little gun shy, because the last time I worked at DC, they just out of the blue fired me off of everything I was working on all at the same time and never gave me a reason. So I would want sort of a reverse continuity contract. I would want them to guarantee the continuity to keep me on. But there's always the question of political agenda and things like that, differences of opinion. So I might not, if DC were to call, I'd have to be left alone to make my work apolitical, as it always was. Marvel's a different story. They don't, I was never in with the in crowd at Marvel. I was never on the mainstream. I was never at the core of Marvel continuity. And even though all but one of those editors that used to work at Marvel when I was there are gone, once you get a rep at a company, it survives way past the editors who established the rep. Long after their departure, you still have this rep. And I was never in the mainstream at Marvel the way I was at DC. So I don't, I doubt very much I would ever hear from them. And, and the same thing goes with the political stuff and the agenda and all. I would want to be left alone, and I would want to be guaranteed a decent run on a book or a project, and not be removed unless it was for, economic reasons. Raph. Call me old hat, but I've always loved the movies based on or inspired by classic pulp heroes and adventure serials of the Golden Age. Films like Dick Tracy, The Shadow, The Phantom, The Rocketeer, and even homages like Sky Captain and The World of Tomorrow. First off, have you got a favorite among the bunch? Secondly, with the overflow of Marvel and DC films, do you think we'll ever see this era of characters on the big screen again? I really don't think we will, because it's kind of a generational thing. The people that created those movies had memories of those characters. They were like, either early baby boomers or, World War II generation creators who had memories. Guys a few years older than me. I mean, I don't remember The Shadow on radio. I don't remember the Pulps. They weren't around when I was a kid. But, I knew the characters because, of my dad and his friends. And, and it wasn't that long ago. And pulps and comics sort of intermingled at conventions in the early days of comic fandom. So, if you were a comic fan, you knew all about the pulp characters. So they were sort of in the zeitgeist, and they're really not anymore. We're far from them. And, audiences don't know who they are. So why would you do that? Sadly. But to run down your list, I'll go from worst to best. The Shadow, the Russell Mulcahy film starring Alec Baldwin, is the worst of the lot. Mostly because there's very little Shadow in it. We only see the Shadow in costume, in action, at the beginning of the film, and it's not a terribly suspenseful or thrilling or well set up action scene, and it seems very much shot on a soundstage kind of thing, and that's pretty much the last we really see of the Shadow. And then they go into his origin, because in this period when they were adapting comic book and pulp material, they felt they always had to do an origin story. And the last thing you want to do with a man of mystery is tell the audience all about him, because then he's no longer a man of mystery. And the rest of the movie involves a plotline that was so dull. This movie is so freaking boring. I can't believe it. And it's done on Hollywood sets that aren't particularly engaging or convincing. The period details are awful. It all looks very phony. It's kind of a basic cable kind of feel to it. It looks like a lower budget, earlier HBO film in a lot of places. And it, again, we don't see the shadow and costume very much. The crime isn't that engaging. The villain isn't that engaging. And it's all it's a waste of time. It really is. Shame, because Baldwin looks great. They got the costume down and everything else. They just got everything else wrong. The Rocketeer suffers from a lot of the same problems, although I like this movie better. It's hard not to like it. It's got a real charm about it. But again, a lot of the period stuff I did not find at all convincing, particularly like interior scenes. And again, there's not enough Rocketeer action. There's more Rocketeer in this than there is Shadow in the Shadow movie, and the climactic action set pieces is really cool. The stuff on inside and on top of the Nazi Zeppelin, that's all cool stuff, but it drags a lot in the middle because there's a lot of time spent to no real good effect with Timothy Dalton, the Timothy Dalton character seducing Jennifer Connelly. And a lot of time is spent on that, a lot more time than was really necessary for the plot line. I also objected to the idea of Timothy Dalton, who is ostensibly playing Errol Flynn, implying that Flynn was a Nazi agent, which at the time was like an urban myth, that Flynn was both gay and a Nazi agent, and you know, neither of them are anywhere near close to the truth. And Flynn was completely apolitical. He didn't have enough interest in world events to be a Nazi. He didn't have enough interest in world events to, join up when World War II began. He just basically wanted to be left alone to his own fabulous life, his own wicked, wicked ways, in his own words. So I objected to that. The other thing I found really unconvincing was the mafia suddenly switching sides. It's like, whoa, we're in bed with Nazis. We're loyal Americans. We're patriotic. No, that's not the history of World War II. The mafia was fine with Nazis because they were fine with Mussolini until they weren't. As long as there was money to be made, they were down with it. Yes, they did switch sides, but it wasn't immediately. And in this movie set in the 30s, the dawn of the Nazi era, they would have had no problem. But to instantly shift sides, at the sight of the red, white, and blue, I don't get it. A more organic plot line for this film would have been, if they wanted to mix the movie business in with Nazis, is the fact that there were Gestapo agents who had offices in the 30s at every major Hollywood studio. Because the German movie audience was so important, the studios allowed in German censors who were Gestapo agents, and they would pre-censor the movies as they were being made, for German audiences, and so it would have been much easier to more organically, more seamlessly involve the Nazis in the movie business in L.A. without the Errol Flynn nonsense. So a lot of that I didn't care for. But everybody in the film was great, and it's fun, and the kids love it. Now, my kids liked The Phantom a lot more, and so did I. This is a movie I've rewatched multiple times. This is a movie that gets it right. It's fast-paced, it's fun, the action is inventive, there's some real humor. They do tell the Phantom's origin because we have to understand who he is and what his motives are, but they don't waste a lot of time on it. And they kind of tell it in pieces. So he remains a bit of a mystery throughout the film as more and more of his past and his lineage is talked about. And then the lineage, of course, is important to the climax of the story. So it's a great story with the Phantom in it, but it also manages to be a story about the Phantom. It's rare for a comic strip or comic book inspired movie to be this well thought out story-wise. Billy Zane is terrific as a wise-ass Phantom. A lot of people are like, oh, the Phantom, he's a grim Avenger. No, these are adapting the 1930s comic strips in which he was a wise-ass. He was a Peter Parker's Spider-Man kind of wisecracker. And Zane gets off some good lines and seems to really be enjoying the role. And Treat Williams is terrific as the villain. Williams adopts this kind of 1930s braggadocio acting style and just chewing the scenery, but that's really what he was there to do. And he seems to be having the time of his life. And we also get Catherine Zeta-Jones practically embodying Valkyrie. So that was kind of cool for me to see that. And it has a great, series of action set pieces. It has a satisfying climax, a satisfying conclusion. And it's a good-hearted, fun flick that's worth watching a few times. Dick Tracy is my favorite of all of these that you listed. Dick Tracy's kind of an amazing film because it's I'm going to say it's the most faithful adaptation of a comic strip or comic book property ever. I mean, this is the Chester Gould strip brought to life, all the way down to the color palette, the appearance of the bad guys. The only thing is there's a bit of wry humor to it that wasn't in the Gould strip, but it's welcome because otherwise it would be grim. The Dick Tracy was a grim strip. Horrible things happened. His criminals, they performed gruesome, heinous crimes and often suffered incredibly awful deaths. But everybody seems to be having a good time. The only down spot in the movie is any scene that Madonna is in. I understand why the filmmakers had her in. It's kind of hedging their bets. We'll get a lot of people talk about this movie because Madonna's in it. I guess that's what they were thinking. But the look of the film, the action, Warren Beatty must have been a devotee of the comic strip to take, and he was very much in charge of this production, to take this kind of an approach to the material, to almost slavishly follow, Gould's setups and characterizations and settings and everything else. And even though a lot of it, like most of these movies, looks a bit set-bound and soundstagey, here that works. It really does, because they've created a fantasy version of Chicago in the 1930s. And I just love the look of it. It's a comic strip movie that didn't forget it was based on a comic strip. And it tries to kind of look like the comic strip as often as possible. And it's also, they paid respect to Gould's grounding. I mean, Gould hated criminals. Gould was a law and order, conservative kind of guy. And they do really ground the film in that, because the opening sequences, when my kids, when they were little and we would watch this, they didn't like the opening sequences. The scene in which Dick Tracy has to beat up this monstrous looking guy who's abusing Junior, the character who would become Junior. And my kids found that scene really disturbing and frightening, and it should have been. It's in keeping with the tone of the original Gould strip. So hats off, big yellow fedoras off to Dick Tracy. Sky Captain of the World Tomorrow, I remember watching it, but I really only remember one thing. JWL7. My first introduction to Detective Comics was Detective Comics 687, which featured the first appearance of Captain Fear. Do you recall what the creative process behind Captain Fear was? Also, given how mysterious Captain Fear's true identity was, did you at any point have in mind who he really was? I've told the story before, but everybody doesn't watch every video. And this might be a story that people go, oh, I don't care if you told it before. Tell it again. Tell it again. Or you're like, oh, my God, this story again? So just skip on to the next question if you're a regular viewer. But this is kind of a fun story. Captain Fear was created by Graham and I for what we felt would be our ultimate Batman story. The perfect, everything but the kitchen sink Batman story that included every element that a great story about the Cape Crusader should have in it. And we came up with a brand new themed Batman villain and new henchmen for him. And we created a mystery surrounding him, a series of clever crimes, interesting settings, suspense, humor, and most of all, and most important of all, a trap. Graham and I are very, very big fans of traps, putting Batman in a trap where he has to use his wits, his intellect, his courage, his strength, his will to escape. And we came up with a doozy. I'm still proud of it. And we were really happy with the story when we did it, because we thought, this is it. This is worthy of Bill Finger and Dick Sprang. This is a classic Batman story with every classic Batman element in it. We didn't miss anything, and we were so happy with it. And the editors hated it. they hated the story. They thought we were doing a pastiche or a parody. We really weren't. It was a loving tribute to everything we loved about classic Batman comics. But they didn't see it that way. And they thought we were being silly, just silly boys, and told us never to do this again, so Captain Fear could not appear again, which was unfortunate because we had set this story up months in advance with the introduction of J. Devlin Davenport, who was Bruce Wayne's annoying a-hole neighbor, who was constantly trying to embarrass or humiliate Bruce Wayne. And of course, Bruce being Bruce, he can't really react to it. And we were going to reveal, our idea was that Captain Fear would appear a couple more times, and then we would ultimately reveal his identity as J. Devlin Davenport. And it would have been so sweet, because now Batman could beat the crap out of the guy who's been, a social pest to him for like a year or more. And so kind of disappointing that we didn't get to do that. But yeah, you were right. We did have in mind who he would be. It's a shame because you rarely get to do a setup like that. And here we were flummoxed. But I still love you guys. This is out to the Batman editors. I understand why you reacted to the story this way. I just wish you hadn't. Okay, Sean Fraser. What is your most and least favorite stories you've ever written? This is a tough one. I've written a lot. Thousands of comics. It's hard to really make a list. A lot of career highlights. I always enjoy writing. I always enjoy the old cliche that my favorite thing is the thing I'm working on right now. But it's it's hard to say. Now, least favorite, I try to turn down jobs I know I'm not going to like. If someone says, we want a 12-issue series of this character that you absolutely hate, it's like, no, I'm not going to do a good job on it. Why would I take that job? I'm a professional writer, but it's not just about money. It's torture writing something you don't want to write. The only exception to that I can think of is in an interview once, I said that Scooby-Doo was my least favorite fictional character of all time. I hated the franchise. And Joan Hilty, the editor of Scooby-Doo comics at the time, called me and said, I'm assigning you a Scooby-Doo story. Now, of course, I could have said no. She, it's not elementary school. She couldn't make me do it. But she thought it was fun to throw down the gauntlet. And I picked it up and I wrote a Scooby-Doo story. And in writing it, I kind of examined the franchise and what I didn't like about it. And I kind of fixed what I didn't like about it without changing anything. I fixed what I didn't like about the Scooby-Doo franchise. And then I learned to like the characters, and I liked the gimmicks, and I wrote, I think, 4 or 5 more Scooby-Doo stories. So I learned to like it, and that's what you have to do. You accept the challenge to write something that you're unfamiliar with, and then you find something in it that you like, that you can, the hook that brings you into the material. For example, I didn't set out to write Mr. T and the T-Force, but as I said, I'm a professional writer. It was a payday. At this point, Now Comics was still paying. And I got to meet Mr. T at a convention. I was offered the job at a convention, got to meet Mr. T, so that was cool. And I had fun with it. It's a goofy comic, but, what the heck? Mr. T deserves decent writing. And at Raggedy Ann and Indigo Flying, before I got into comics, I did a little bit of work in children's books. Not my chosen career. I wanted to be a comic book guy. but it was a paying writing gig, and I was going to get published. And I had to write under the name Mary J. Fulton, which my grandmother's was my grandmother's maiden name, because they said no man can write Raggedy Ann and Andy, even though it was created by a man. So I read a lot of original Johnny Gruelle Raggedy Ann and Andy chapter books, got a feel for the characters, and wrote the book. And I enjoyed it. I really did. I enjoyed the characters. I understood what Gruelle was going for, the basis of the characters. The point is that I gained such an understanding of the character that I butted heads with the editors and art director who wanted all these changes made. And I felt like Joe Piscopo on Saturday Night Live when they would ask him to play Frank Sinatra and have him do this and have him do that. And Joe would say, but Frank wouldn't do that. I was like, Raggedy Ann and Andy wouldn't do that. They wouldn't act that way. What you're talking about doesn't make sense for these characters. And I won the day. They didn't make the changes they wanted to make because I showed them the reason why all of those mistakes were a bad idea. Of course, I never worked for them again. Children's books it's a tough field. It is a tough field. Anyway, that's it for this episode because of my lagging issues. The next episode will continue right after this, and just look for it. And if this is the only one you watched, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. And hopefully I'll see you just around the next turn.